that now. Okay, we had our quiz. Again, this is welcome now. This is our third class. Did everyone get a copy of the... I gave today, after our quiz, we finished our quiz, we're a little ahead. It's we're 2 minutes ahead, so I designed it so everyone would have a minute a question, right? And given it's true false, I don't think everyone needs 60 seconds for a true false question. So therefore, there's plenty of time. Today, as we look at if I go over here to the thing, today's topic, the birth of the state, it continues on. I'm going to continue some things of. I hit on the political community, but we didn't go a lot into it, so I returned to it. But the birth of the state, or the polis in the state, the readings were from Minagu's chapters of 5 through 7, which dealt with basically the modernist development of the nation state and modern state structure. We'll continue some of that more next week when we'll go into the Bobbitt reading and further Minette. Minette, the city, empire, and sovereignty, which the city, empire, and church and nation essay, which actually many of these essays kind of go into next week's. In other words, it covers all 3 weeks, okay? So therefore, sometimes you're repeating stuff, you're getting a new essay. It's not like I could have broken up every little assignment, like you read this little bit of here, little bit of here, little bit of here, but life isn't like that. So what I did was you're going to be, I've decided to break up reading to some degree, but it's going to still cover like 2 or 3 areas of things. So it will will reinforce what was said last week. It will address what is covered this week, and then it points to what is to come soon. What is very important here in this sense, for understanding what we're going to be doing here, is the question of the political. What is meant by the political in this sense, okay? If we looked before at tribes and empire, we would say tribal rule was basically what? Tribal rule would be basically what? Rule of family members, right? Rule of kin groups, tribal rule was basically rin of kinship groups and kin groups, right? Okay, how does that work? That's usually consent. There's a combination. Family rule is both consensual and involuntary, okay? Think of that. Think of how families operate, right? Families are not purely voluntary structures. There is coercion. There's physical coercion as well as emotional, psychological, intimidation, guilt, all these other things, right? Coercion is not, the idea of coercion is not just only I'm going to beat you up thing. It's going to be like, well, guilt. Guilt is a form of coercion in that sense. That's a sense of obligation, okay, that people often have. And other things that shame is a form of coercion. Honor and shame is a very important aspect of human psychology. It's as much honor and shame is as much a very important role in human psychology as interest and cost. Cost, okay, so-called cost-benefit realities. We're competing with the emergency sirens now, so therefore we are competing with a very fundamental aspect of this. Now, that's our reading. That's what we're going to be talking about. We're talking about this. I'll go back to the thing. Therefore, we have to look at the natures of what we said, the types of rule. In a kind of, not necessarily from the reading from Weber, because Weber's reading on types of rule goes very much into his idea of which I kind of have in my last thing, which we'll hit again onto it. What he calls his 3 sources of authority argument. Okay, the traditional, legalistic, or charismatic as the basis of authority. But then he also goes in the idea of parties, the role of political institutions, political parties. He points the type of rule argument that he gets, this idea of, he's trying to understand, in the last week's reading, he's trying to understand why there is this sense of why people obey other people, why people follow other people, why people defer the questions of authority. We would like to determine what is. See, we would sometimes think about authority as terms of what is, awe. It can be awe. It can be by awe. Awe is that English word AWE. It means like it's like you are a sense of overcome and you're shocked. It's like the relationship between something very beautiful, something very powerful, and your emotional response to it is just like you're reacting to it in a sense of it overpowers you. Okay, awe is like that. So sometimes now if that's the extreme aspect of authority. Authority also means that you accept you accept that this person or this group or this institution can make demands of you, and you accept those demands. Okay, so there is a kind of understanding of compliance on your part, that it is voluntary. Okay, it is not simply this that I'm doing it because it's like we're not ants in that sense. We're not ants in the sense that in the ant community, the queen ant sends a bioelectrical communication to the other ants, and the other ants just simply have to do what the communication tells them to do. Okay, I mean they can. The queen ant can change a warrior ant to a worker ant just by the sending of a certain chemical to it. Okay. So therefore, human beings are more complex. We have to do this. We have to do this in the sense that human beings aren't programmable automatically. They have to be kind of persuaded into doing things. Okay, they have to be talked into it. They have to because they have it will. They have the ability to say no. They have pride. Some people have pride. Some people don't have pride. I mean, again, you're dealing with a range of the human types, right? Human beings have a range of human types. People who have strong courage. People who lack courage. People who have strong pride. People who lack pride. People who have self-control. Others who don't have self-control. In other words, in human nature and human beings, there's a wide variety of characteristics that shape human nature, and therefore every community is like a mini version of humanity, with a similar range, with a similar kind of dichotomy, and every community will actually have different, structures of where it is. Some communities may have more courage than other communities. Some people will have more courage than other people. Some people have less. Some people will have more self-control. Others will have less self-control. Why is that? Well, Montesquieu in Spirit of the Laws argue it is climate, geography. He argued, right? That the climate you're in will shape your character. People in cold characters will be tougher than people who are from warm climates. People, in other words, but that is also, he got there. I mean, he wrote that before our understanding of Darwinian evolution. Okay, see, in many ways, he's right, but he's wrong. It's not that it's mere environment. It's human nature and human evolutionary biological makeup and how it adapts to the environment in order to survive. Okay, so you took any virus and you put a virus in different environments, it will adapt. Any genetic entity, if you put it in different environments, really different environments, the organism will adapt to survive in that environment. What does survival mean in that environment? It means replicate itself. Darwinian survival is the idea that the idea is the community replicates itself. How do you replicate yourself, human beings? Babies. If you don't, in other words, the surest way to cease to exist, have no babies. No replication. And if you don't replicate, you're a genetic dead end. Okay, that's this simple Darwinian reality. Okay, so, but then again, groups will have people who don't, does everyone in the group have to replicate? No, because sometimes, what happens? Sometimes in a group or a kin group, some people won't replicate, and what they will do, they'll donate their lives and their time and their effort to their family kin, their kin group or their national group, or their community, right? And what does that do? That improves the group's survival chances. So yes, it's individuals should do this, but it's also people act within groups. They have, in other words, it's not only myself, right? Human beings only have a self-interest. Because they have relationships and love of others, they have affection for others, their family, but also their friends and their and the people they share their lives with, their neighbors, their fellows, and when they share political community with each other, they share a common bond as citizens, okay? So this is the thing about therefore, this idea, this economic rule, we see it's pure, what? It's mutual economic interest, right? Economic rule is about utility sharing, cost benefit. The problem with economic relationships, well, it can be a one-time deal. It can be longer, but then if it's longer, habits will be formed. Relationships will be formed. You don't have to care about the other person. Economic life, you don't have to care. In fact, there's no reason why you care. You have to like the person? No. You don't have to like the person. So it's simply just utility that matters. Okay? Now, parental rule, this is care. The care of children. Parents caring children. This develops into, it's involuntary. It's not something you enter into voluntarily. It is like this. Now, parental care follows down to aspects of other forms of kin-based care. Brotherly love, fraternal relationships, cousin relationship, again, fraternal. So paternal and fraternal intertwine, but so doesn't marital relation, husband and wife. Though parental relationships are between unequals, fraternal and marital relationships are basically a kind of rule of equals. Okay, so therefore, there's something odd about the household. The household will have multiple relationships, as we remember last week. It will have the relationship between parent-child, husband-wife, kin group, then master-slave, master-servant. So it's not merely just the relationship of the family, okay? It's something bigger, it's something larger to it. But it's still insufficient for living well, okay? That's what the polis emerged from the Greek, the idea of the city. What we translate the city, the Greeks called the polis. The polis was a form of a human association or community. So it was a form of koinonia community, which was composed of households that allowed the human beings to live well, to live to a situation where they could be. The word is autarkos, which would be translated sometimes in self-sufficiency, but they would have enough to be able to live finely or beautifully. Okay, they wouldn't be living just to be able to survive. It's more than survival. It's living well. Okay, and the polis, the city, provided that. But what was the polis? The polis was an accident of human history. Because before that, what was it? It was, okay, the world was between tribes and empires. Family, kin groups, and like this, and then one tribe or a warlord conquers all these tribes and rules by coercion. That's despotic rule. Despotic rule is what? The rule by force, the rule by coercion, the rule of people like slaves. Okay? So therefore, political rule, the rise of the polis was a kind of, it imitated, okay. The empires brought one thing. The empire, although it was based on coercion, it was based on coercion and force, and it often relied on involuntary rule. It produced benefit. It produced things like written language, organized religion, like priests and class. It took tribal religions tended to be primitive, tended to be ancestor worship, tended to be animalism and very simple worship, not really complex. If you ever look at the way the Native American Indians have their worship religions, or even of Southeast Asian peoples that they really haven't developed, they were like kind of island people. You look at their religions, you can see what I mean by that, right? It's not really organized. The priests are just usually, people who like older people who have had more experience with dealing with the ancestors. Okay, so therefore this is how. But empires brought in an organized concept of religion and priestcraft, of worship, of awe to the gods. Okay, to something overly transcendental that legitimates this empire, this rule. Okay. Now, what happened? Well, what happened? The story is the story of a great disaster happened. We don't all know. Around 11th and 12th century, something really drastic happened in the Mediterranean region. Because over the Mediterranean, there was probably one giant empire over all these people. And what do empires do always? They always intermingle tribal populations. If you ever saw every empire, what they do is they don't want the tribe to be strong, to be able to rebel. So what they do is they often force tribes to mix together so that, what happens? It makes it so that they can't, in other words, no one trusts each other. In other words, they don't have the kin-based relationships since everyone is basing their kinship relationships, are so used to kin-based relationships to base their authority structures. Once you have a population that's very intertwined and heterogeneous, right, what happens? It becomes more and more difficult for people to work together. You get more violence, you get more disputes, you have to use more, and the ruler often has to use a lot more coercion. The greater the heterogeneity of a population, the more violence or coercion is necessary to maintain order. This is a very important sociological, anthropological reality. Societies that are more homogeneous tend to require less coercion to enforce law. In fact, usually law in a very homogeneous societies tend to be self-enforcing. Social norms and social behavior will enforce norms. So empires being so heterogeneous, so intertwined of things, required lots of coercion to maintain it. So what happened? If it grew too big, it didn't have enough power to maintain itself, and it collapsed. Or some tragedy happened. And we know that there was a big tragedy that happened. Some call it the flood, right? The Messian Flood. What's most likely happened was, remember, the Black Sea was at one time it is a freshwater. It's black because salt water poisoned fresh water. So in other words, the Dardanelles happened. Something happened to force the erosion of the rocks. And what happened? Salt water flooded into fresh water. And what happened at the Black Sea? If you go look in the Black Sea underneath the water, you'll see ancient 12th century 10th century, 11th century stone things about a couple hundred feet down. They find little villages of what was left of the stone elements of buildings and things. Because what happened? The flood happened. It destroyed a massive an empire. This is why there's the myth of Atlantis, right? This is the myth of Atlantis. This is why there is things. And what happened? What happened when the flood happened? These interdispersed populations settled around the Greek and the Balkan areas on hilly land. And what happened? They just survived. And in order to create these communities were very these populations were very mixed. And what separated them was valleys and hills. So what happened was this created a situation where there was very much local autonomy, people having to rely on fertile ground agricultural life, the return to agricultural life, and a return to tribalism, but they said, no, they took elements of the old system. They took elements of understandings of law, certain elements of religion, and therefore the rise of the polis around the 8th and 9th century was this kind of attempt to recapture what the empire had, but within the frameworks of these microcosms of these local communities. So, how it differed from empire was that it was kind of a mixture. It was like the family, a mixture of the involuntary and the voluntary. But it was more than family. It was not. It could be homogeneous, but it also could be heterogeneous. In other words, you could have. In other words, a polis. Some of the Greek polises were very homogeneous. Other Greek polises were not homogeneous. Athens and Thebes, and more Athens. Athens was a very heterogeneous population. If you know the myths of ancient Athens, it was formed by strangers, the lost children of Athena, right? That's the story about that, right? That's why it's named after Athena. Athens is named after Athena. If you understand the way of how Athens was formed, you can understand. Also, it has another example. Rome and Athens are very similar. Why? Both are formed by one was formed by Theseus in the sense that it was Athena, that he created a city of vagabonds and robbers and created it. But so didn't the Trojan Achilles come to the Latinum, and then what happens? He does is he forms a city. He doesn't necessarily form a city, but his descendants, the Tarquins, will form a region of central Italy, right? That's the Latin area. That's why Latin language is the big thing. But there's no different peoples do it. Then what happens is that you had basically Romulus and the story of Romulus and Remus. And what happens is Romulus forms the city, and how does he do it? He does it from basically he uses vagabonds, people, runaways, people like this, and everyone. He makes a city. So the cities of Rome and Athens are very similar in their structures. They are what? They're usually they're not homogeneously constructed cities out of a common people. They're formed out of heterogeneous populations. They're often formed by a king or a ruler who's very strong, but then what happens? Political rule diverges from the rule of the king to the rule of the people or the elites. Okay. In other words, a strong ruler forms and shapes them, and then what happens? The people overturn their rule, the ruler of the strong rule, and therefore that becomes this idea of this census. This is the city, the polis, or the Roman word civitas. This is the frame of political life. It's a mixed character, as we said there. We talked about this. It's voluntary and involuntary. The problem with the polis is its size. there's a limit to the city, the polis, politically. Why? Because it's all about people you know. It's about neighbors. How many people can, in other words, communities, the sense of community, that people know each other and they know each other well, and they have to be able to communicate with each other. So there's going to be size limits. Because if it gets too big, it will just fall apart. It will either fall apart or devolve into a tyranny, one way or another. Either the rule of one man, a rule of the few, or the rule of the many, but tyrannical rule nevertheless. So the nature of political rule understands this, that in other words, it grows, cities grow like tribes. Tribes can't get too big. What happens in a political tribe? A tribe grows too big, what happens, the tribe will split into two factions. They will split and develop. Okay? That's how it often will happen in tribal structures. Because you have tribes have limits to the ability in order to hold together and to survive, to sustain themselves. Okay, most tribes tend to be non-agricultural. They tend to be hunter-gatherers or herders. So therefore, there has to be limits to what can be done to things. They can't grow too big. If they grow too big, they have to break up and they'll go into different parties in order so that they can prosper. So therefore, the cities operate like this. The cities they grow too big, they'll form colonies and build new places. Okay. Empire, it also engages like empire. It embraces written law. It uses religion, public works, and also embraces things that we call culture, civilization, literature, drama. Okay. So the polis, the political life, the life of the city, is the life that echoes. In other words, it has the structure and the limits of the tribe, but it has all the kind of benefits of the empire. Okay. Now, the other thing about political civic life, the fundamental construct of political life is the citizen. What is the citizen? The citizen is the one who shares in rule. Okay, we have a nice drawing picture person. What does, do you understand what sharing in rule means? What does sharing in rule mean?
Sharing in rule?
Yeah.
It's like having a say in lawmaking.
Yeah, but is it not just having a say? It's you are part of, as a citizen, you are the lawmaker. Not just to say, you are the lawmaker. You are every citizen in a political construction would be a citizen. The citizen is sovereign. The collective body altogether acts together, but every person is the active agent. So therefore, you need to get a kind of collective understanding of things, and therefore, usually majority rule. But every citizen is someone who is both ruler and ruled. Okay? The classic conception of life is the difference between ruler and ruled, right? Rulers and subjects. Most people most world today, politics, life is full. A citizen is not a subject. To call a subject a citizen is the greatest sin of modern life. That's why Rousseau mocks. He says, in France, since Rousseau's writing around the time of the Empire, Louis the 16th, right, before the Revolution. He says, everyone in France calls each other citizen. If they only knew how much of how dangerous that saying that is. Because who's the only citizen really? in Louis XIV's France.
King himself.
The king himself. The only real citizen is the king. Everyone else are subjects. The modern world corrupts citizenship by what? It has made citizenship a concept of you are a holder of certain rights. It's reduced, in other words, the modern world reduces citizenship to the possession of certain rights that the state must guarantee from you. And that's it. The classical understanding is that a citizen is a real sharer of rule. It's like the idea of a citizen is like a joint stockholder. The example of this would be if you owned a share in the company. A stockholder owns a share in the company. He's an owner. Yes, his vote is it's one share, one vote, not one person, one vote, one share. So some share owners have more shares, but this, the city the political community is a joint stock structure where every member is a shareholder. Or all citizens are shareholders. And they have a structure of ownership. It's theirs. The body politic is theirs. They're a joint owner. Okay? Not that you're just a subject or protectee of this, a subject, and therefore entitled to certain rights. No, you are the owner. You're the ruler. Co-ruler with all the other citizens. So citizenship is the idea, a very fundamental idea of civic life. That's why the word civic means. Civic is the world of citizens. And the Greek idea of citizenship meant every citizen was to defend the city. Every one of you were the policemen. The only people who have police people in the ancient world are tyrannies. Unfree people need policemen. Unfree. The fact that a Greek and Roman would come and see your police and say, you are not free people, you are slaves. Would look at you in contempt. You are nothing but a bunch of lazy slaves who deserve to have your throat slits when the master comes. Because you depend on others to protect you. That is how the Roman would look at you. Now the Romans became slaves too as they got big and powerful. And as their republican rule, their political rule, became basically a despotism under the empire, under Caesar. Okay? So political rule is understood in this light. Now this is like, I use this graph here. This is the idea. The political rule, we talked about the limiting of this and this, but political rule, the tribe and the empire and the political rule are kind of spheres. Where the political rule embraces, now think of this as this thing overcoming these two. The realm of the empire and the realm of the tribe are they kind of border on each other. Sometimes they hit each other, but they don't really. Usually a tribe will become an empire. One tribe will become the leader of an empire who then runs and governs other tribes, right? But the political rule is kind of a thing that kind of embraces both aspects of both these qualities. So think of this as spatial things, the qualities of polis and the qualities of tribe, right? The tribe and the empire. The qualities of the empire, the quality of the tribe, and then the political kind of overlaps them. So therefore, this is the interesting aspect of it, in the sense that the politics is that in between state, a parental rule and embodies tribal rule and dominance, submission required by imperial rule. of the empire's hegemonic units of the pre-classical world. He says, this is right there. He says, for the classical world, the political was embodied by the polis, or the civitas. But where for us moderns, we don't have this. In other words, we don't live in the world of the polis. Starting in the 1500s and 1600s, the modern world, with modern thinking, philosophy, created a new political form. The political form of the ancient world was the polis, or the civitas. The modern world, modern thinkers, starting with the political writer who did this was Machiavelli. Machiavelli, who in his Prince and his other writings, coined the word. The word state, as we use it now, comes from, because the word status in Latin, this meant the status of a thing. In Italy, the same thing, status of a thing. Machiavelli uses the term not in terms of the status of something. He used it to refer to the body politic, the political form itself. And then later, he did this in his writings earlier, before the Prince. We know his use of the word Coercion with Italian writers and correspondents of the time, because remember, he was a diplomat and an actor before he wrote The Prince. Remember, Machiavelli writes The Prince because he got fired and tortured. His republic was taken over by the enemies. What do you call it? Not the Borgias. The Medicis came back and took over power and restored rule over Florence and overthrew the republics. And Machiavelli was tossed out of his position as one of the leading counselors in charge of war and foreign policy. In fact, tortured, but then let go and forced to live in exile. He was forced to live in the countryside out of power. And he was bored, so he wrote his Prince and his other political writings that we know him from today. In other words, out of boredom, he turns to writing things. The other ideas is, look at people like Francis Bacon. The minister, he started out as a minister for Queen Elizabeth, and then ended up being the Lord Chancellor under James I, and then was kicked out for crimes. Again, dismissed, but James didn't have him killed. James protected him, and then he just spent the rest of his life writing science and also writing political analysis. Okay, this becomes his mentor was Thomas Hobbes. Bacon, Hobbes. Who else? The French writer Descartes. These are the birth of modern philosophy. And what is the modern state? It is if you understand modern science, modern thought, modern science is not about trying to know things. It's trying to conquer nature for the benefit of man's estate. Hence chapter 25 of the Prince. The young prince must rape fortune for the benefit of the community. Conquer nature. What is fortune? Nature. The physical world. Man must conquer nature and fortune for the benefit of the people. Therefore, Descartes, the whole scientific method, science, modern science is what? It's not about knowing to know. It's we know things in order to change the world, to make it better. And what is the state? The state is the first instrument of technology. It is to conquer nature in order for men to live better, to live freer, the argument was. In other words, that it was the problem with the ancient city was that it couldn't get too big, and because it was too big, big empires could gobble it up. In other words, the cities had a problem it had a problem of cooperating with each other, and it couldn't work together. And therefore, another thing that affected the city was religion. Once Christianity came in there, Christianity changed everything. Why? It created a common universal world that sought to unify humanity towards a calm. In other words, all humanity was going to be under one divine rule. The monotheistic religions changed the way you even envision the world. The monotheistic religions forced total rethinking about nature. That nature is not eternal. Nature was created. So therefore there's a beginning and then there's an end. Whereas the ancient world believed in cycles, eternal return. There's always cycles of human history, cycles of culture. The monotheistic religions give you a creator, a transcendent being, a beyond being in existence, above it, who created this from nothing, and then this thing will end at some time. And everything here is a product of the creator's will. Okay? The monotheistic religion. In the pagan religions, this is all of the pagans, the gods are only a super being. The gods are no more than divine. They're divine and powerful, but they're not the creators of the universe. They are fellow superior beings who have better knowledge of nature, but they're not above nature. So therefore, these things create fundamental challenges to the old world. And when you combine the Roman Empire with Christianity, that became a problem. So therefore, we have another problem. In other words, we have a problem of some people call it the theological political problem. Therefore, in other words, that once you have the theology of uniformity, of a universalistic philosophy, you have the idea of what? Okay, this is the Greek word. Cosmo. What does that mean?
Next.
Cosmos. What does that mean?
Universe.
Big, world, universe, everything, right? Other word, polis. The city, right? The political world. Cosmopolis. These are contradictions. These are what the cosmos as the whole and the polis is particular, right? So what does the Stoics and the Romans do? Actually, it was first Alexander the Great, and then later Caesar. They did what? They mixed these two. In other words, Rome, at first it was going to be Alexander. He was going to form Alexander, and now it's going to be the cosmos. The whole world will be his polis. He died, and everything formed back to tribal, little teeny micro empires, right? Then what happened? Rome. Rome was a little more successful until it collapsed because of a lot of things. First of all, it couldn't keep everything together. It's too big and it was too big, too wide. And then all of a sudden they got hit with the Huns. As the Huns left, the Tartars and the Mongols left northern Mongolia and went westward. It drove other peoples westward, the Vandals, the Huns, and these people, the Goths, the Visigoths. That's one wave of revolution. And then the other wave of revolution happened 600 AD. That happened around 400, 500 AD, that wave, 400, 500 AD. The next little wave happened in 600 AD with a guy called Muhammad. And then with 100 years, the Mohammedans have conquered all of the most of the Roman Empire in the Mediterranean. On the African side, completely. North Africa was completely taken over. Almost up to Asia Minor, up to near Constantinople. Okay, which is the capital of the Roman Empire by the 6th century. By 3rd or 4th century, the Roman Empire moved from Rome to Constantinople by Constantine the Great. And by doing that, what did he do? He made the western part of the empire easy. So once the Huns come down and cut them off, right, the Western Empire, Constantinople was, once the Huns go into the Balkans and towards northern Italy, what happens to the ability of of Constantine, or the Constantinople, the empire, Roman Empire headquarters, to control the Western territories. None. So everything falls apart. They just care about their section there. The Greek, Roman Empire shrinks and shrinks until it only becomes what's left of the Roman Empire becomes Byzantine, and the so-called Byzantine Empire, right? And the Roman Empire collapses. And was it 1450? When does Constantinople fall?
1454.
I think 1450. I don't remember the exact date, but somewhere around there. That's when Constantinople falls. That is the official end of the Roman Empire. Okay. So that's the structure of what we have to understand this change here. Now this is why the polis versus the state. These are not the same things. These are conceptually different things. Yes, they're the idea of the political form, right? But the political form, the form of the political, the social form, the social body or the organizational body, that the political manifests itself in the classical world was the polis or the city, right? The city or the civitas, polis, the city. These are what? Again, the ancient form, but also what? It's like based on the concept of the community, or the Greek word koinonia, which is the German Gemeinschaft, which is, remember we said about Gemeinschaft in the previous class, Gemeinschaft, organic, emergent from environment, accidental and emergent, rests on culture and tradition, where society is artificial, rested to fit on needs and wants. Okay, remember that was the previous thing? Well, this is the thing about this. This is that in many ways the polis emerged out of the community, and the communities are, we understand community is more intimate, more kind of like things that we know and have intimate relationships with. Society is just vague. It's usually shared interests. People who have shared interests with. You can have, in other words, society is just simply something you share, someone you share an interest with. Either economic interest or some form of activity. It's not your whole life. You don't share your whole life in societies. Societies is much more larger construct. In other words, it doesn't require, society doesn't, the concept of society is not as intense in this sense as community would be, okay? In this sense. So what does this mean? Well, that the house, in other words, this polis in the Greek conception of the city, or even the Roman city, is a discrete unit of parts. In other words, it's a component. I would even use the Polish example of the Respospolita of the First Republic. What was the Respospolita? It was a union of the Szlatka, the house, the estates. It was all these discrete parts, these discrete holders of authority, household heads. How all these households come together and they form the community, the parts. It's a discrete unit of part where one part, it is held together by a governing part or a ruling part. One part rules the whole, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Either because other people don't care about it, they let them rule. It's too much of a bitch to actually fight about who's ruling. As long as he delivers things or she delivers things, we don't care, right? Come on, think about this. How many people actually care about politics? Not many. As long as they're not being harmed, when their lives and their estate, when their persons, bodies, and fortunes are being harmed by the system, then they care. But when things are relatively good, most people don't care. Okay? Only very few people care about politics. Ambitious people care about politics. In fact, there's a hilarious movie from the 1990s called True Colors. It's worth watching because, come on, who is that? I'm blanking the name. famous actor who does a stupid movie. He did Gross Point Blank. He and his sister like twins, but not Nicolas Cage. It's the other guy. It was in Bullets Over Broadway. What are Woody Allen movies? Oh God! The Gross Point Blank. I remember the name. Well, the other actor is the guy who plays in Blacklist. Who plays the kind of scary guy who knows everything. The TV series Blacklist. He's the guy who plays in the Blacklist. He was a nice pretty boy early in the 1990s, and he was going to be a hero. And then the other actor was kind of the skinny. And the ending scene of that movie where I forget his name. It's going to drive me crazy now. He has the scene where he's what?
The actor was John Cusack.
What?
John Cusack.
Cusack, yes, Cusack. Pronounce people would everyone with a mask. It's hard to hear people sometimes. I don't mean this. John Cusack. Yeah, John Cusack has this powerful scene where he's been caught, right, trying to cheat an election, taking bribe money and things like this. Right? And he goes to the scene where he's being caught, and he says, "Listen, I need the people. No, why do you do this? He stole the guy's girl, but then he cheats on the girl in order to get power." And he says, "Why did you give up, her for this?" He says, "I don't need just one person. I need everyone." The political character, the tyrant, or the ambitious person doesn't want to be loved by one person or two people. They want to be loved by masses. They need the mass. And if they're able to communicate the mass, this is the nature of certain people. There's certain people who need to have ambition. They're ambitious. They want things. The other movie about ambitious people is my favorite movie, Election. You ever see the movie Election? It was HBO, one of the not HBO. It was one of the few movies of MTV, like in early 1999. What? Reese Witherspoon's whatever movie. And who was the guy who played? Okay, he played Ferris Bueller. Matthew Broderick. Matthew Broderick plays the civics teacher. And Reese Witherspoon plays the high school girl who's a wannabe goody two-shoes student council type. Okay? You have to understand, Americans despise the students who want to be student council types. These are evil people. Because anyone who knows student council is a joke. Because it has no power. It's the suck-ups and the ambition types who do things. And the sister of the guy who plays her speech about who cares, it's one of the greatest speeches about this kind of cynical attitude that most people have about political life. Because you know what happens? All young Americans get demoralized about politics because of high school politics. Because of what they learn in high school about civics. Because of student council government. In other words, student council basically black pills all young people. Because what happens? It's ruled by the ambitious. The ambitious, self-serving, ambitious people are the ones who self-select to go in positions. And it's the rule of the popular. It's a sick relationship between the popular and the ambitious. And God help anyone who is both popular and ambitious. This is the curse of democratic societies in this sense. But the modern state is what? This is a unitary structure. If the ancient Polis is a discrete body, the modern state is a construct based on what? It's a unitary. It is held together by will. Machiavelli argued that it was the ruler's will at first. But Hobbes argues that no. The state is not the ruler's will. It's the combination of all the members' will. It was Hobbes and his social contract theory, which explains two things. It explains how political world emerges out of the nothing. That he argues that there's no social environment until men form society and form the state simultaneously through the social contract. In other words, it's voluntarily. But what it is, it's a contract. It's a agreement through our collective will that everyone wills it. And what is the will is? Because in nature, everyone has a right to do whatever one wants. I don't make you read Hobbes, but Hobbes is Leviathan. Hobbes says, in the state of nature, no one has a constraint on you. Every will has the absolute right to whatever it wants. And it's just to want whatever you want. In other words, whatever you want, you have a right to it. A just right. So I want your headset. I have a knack in nature, in the state of nature, anyone who wants his headset has a natural right to it. It is just for them, everyone who wants it, to take it and use it. You see the problem right there? Who determines it? Everyone. How do you secure your right? Well, you secure your right if you have the means to do it. Those who have the means enjoy. Those who don't. So what does society become? No, but then there's a problem. Everyone takes what they want. So do you work? Does anyone work effort to build anything? Why would you, if I plant crops in the ground, if you want those crops, you can take them. So why should I work any effort so that someone else is going to come and take it? And I said, no work, no effort, everyone steals, everyone takes, therefore, what is this world? This world is a world of everyone against everyone else. The war of all against all. Where Hobbes describes it as a world where this world is nasty, cruel, a war of all against all, where life and that stuff is nasty, cruel, brutish, and short. Now, in this world, what is everyone? How would you feel in that world? Would you feel safe? You'd be living in perpetual fear, won't you? Do human beings like living in fear? You want to escape fear, don't you? So, what happens when someone comes along and says, hey, let's all join together, but we have to make a deal. We have to surrender our right. All of us have to agree that none of us can do what we want anymore. We submit ourselves to our collective decision. We submit ourselves to it. We submit ourselves to. We're going to create this body and law, and we're going to submit ourselves to this collective body. And he will this law body, this body we create, will adjudicate who does that belong to. It will decide where does that belong to. And the argument is that, well, if you made it, we'll say it's yours. Because we want to include, we as society want people to work hard and prosper, the benefit. So this benefits everyone. So if I don't allow you to enjoy the fruit of your effort, why would anyone work? Since having people work and producing things is necessary, then we have to protect them. You understand? Therefore, the rule, in other words, the state has to constrain. You create, in other words, the social contract and the members and their collective will creates the state. And the state guarantees your first and foremost right, your right to your life, the right to your safety and survival. That's the guarantee. And if anyone breaks it, what happens? Well, you're kicked out, you're discharged from and you're returned back in the state of nature where this big, giant, powerful collective thing will crush you. In other words, the criminal, the person who breaks the law or breaks the contract, is outside of the protection of the social contract, and therefore he's fair game to be gobbled up and destroyed. So therefore peace is maintained. Okay, so this is the logic of the modern world. To escape the nature, which is a state of fear and terror, we form a voluntary construction, which then becomes over time involuntary in that sense, right? What is it? It's no longer organic, it's a product of what? Will. And by the way, what is the tendency of willing structures? The will tends to be homogeneous, doesn't it? Or does it be heterogeneous? What would you call a will or a psyche that was split up and divided? Or conflicted with itself. We would call that what? Schizophrenic, right? A healthy will is a unitary will. It's a homogeneous will. So the nature of the state is always towards being a product of willingness. The collective will enforces a homogeneity. And if you rebel against the homogeneity, what are you? You are sick. Something's wrong with you. You need correction. You need help. You need to be detained. You conform, or because if you completely break, you're outside the protection of the state. And the state will use their coercive force in order to protect the rest of society from you. So the nature of the state is that is a world where there is basically citizenship has been reduced to what? Guarantees of security and guarantees of rights. In other words, we've gone from citizenship to rights. And you, by the way, you don't protect your own rights, because the state guarantees your rights. So what happens? In the modern state, how do we do it? We have policemen to protect us. We don't protect ourselves. We don't defend ourselves. We don't enforce our own rights. We hire others to do it. Or that you defer to the state who hires others to do it. So what happens? You become subject, increasingly subject to the collective will. So this is the problem of this. And again, goes back to this. Now, one of the readings we had was Weber's famous 1919 essay. 1919 essay. It was a speech. He gave it at University of Munich called "The Vocation as Politics as Vocation." This is a very interesting lecture because he goes into very detailed analysis about the structure of politics, right? As it's practiced, what its structure is, how does it, the characteristic parts of this. He reinforces the three principal aspects of legitimacy again. He talks about the justification of charisma with leadership, the Führer, the charismatic leader. Then the idea of how the ruling powers maintain dominant rule. And then he talks about the practice of politics, right? The career, in other words, the two forms of politics. One, the idea of living for politics or living off politics. The career politician, the machine politician. Now, Weber does not sneer at this. He's not. Some people read this as he's kind of condemning. He wants to have the perfect, clean. He even argues here, the problem with politics is the problem of clean hands, ethics of responsibility. That a lot of time political men, in order to do the right thing, have to get their hands dirty and might have to do things that they, as individuals, would not view ethical or moral. But the public good and the public safety and the public benefit requires you to do that. But the problem is modern world is full of 19-year-old schoolgirls. You know, oh my God, how could you do that? Oh, oh. In other words, they cry, they freak, and they yell. Okay, this is sexist, right? But come on, this is what they are. Come on, this is. I'm being honest with you, right? Think about this. Think of how most Europeans act when someone uses force in the world to correct them. Oh, we shouldn't do that. Everyone is not, what is every European saying? Stop the war, right? Not Putin, get the fuck out. We won't tolerate this. We'll rise up. Europeans will sign up for the army to kick what the Russians are doing is horrible. We will not stand this. We will go to the battlefield and stop it. No. They will say, I'm with Ukraine. But what they will do is, no, military, don't send your troops to punch. The only way Ukraine gets saved right now is if everyone says, we're willing to risk war. Okay, you understand that? That's the difference. And this is a game of chicken. Putin knows you guys are weak. You want your sausages. You want your MTV. You want your TikTok, and you will virtue signal. But when it's time to, if he threatens you with actual death, you'll say, oh, no, I forget about it, and hope that over time people will just get bored with it. Okay, that's the difference. That's the hardcore problematic aspect of this. So yes, you have the moralism of, oh my God, isn't that horrible? But politics is about dirty hands. It's about, I'm sorry, it's about, sometimes you have to kill people. Bad people. And if you're not, in other words, there's a saying, every image of justice, what do you see justice? What is the symbols of justice? If you have a statue or a thing of justice, what does the statue always consist of?
Blind woman with the
scales. What else? Sword. No sword, no justice. You understand? The sword. Justice without the sword is meaningless. And if you're not, and actually having the sword but you're not willing to use it, that's even more meaningless. That it's only a prop. If everyone knows it's just a prop, then you might as well not even have the sword. There is no justice. That is the reality of political life. Political life is about economic life is merely about utility, okay? It's about utility and maximization of utility, okay? Political life, it's about the utility plus coercion. Max Weber makes it very clear in here. What is the nature of the state? It is the legit, and this is that famous line. This is why I don't want to use it, but let's see if I have it. Did I put it up here? No, I didn't put it up here. It is on page 136 of the Walter and Walter readings, right? No, that's a different thing I gave you. The Walter and Walter readings. This is the definition of the state. He said, Trotsky once said at Brest-Litovsk, every state is founded on Gishvat, means violence. That includes physical force. Coercion, that's, he uses the word Gishvat. Trotsky sees that correctly. If there only were social entities which were unaware of the concept of coercion as the means, especially with the implication for the use of violence, then the term state would cease to exist. And then something would have occurred which we would call anarchy, in a very specific meaning of the word. Anarchy literally means in Greek, without order. Without, ana means without, archy means rule, without rule, okay? A physical force is, of course, not normal, not the only means available to the state. This is not what we are talking about. I am saying that physical force is specific and intrinsic to the state, and especially today. The relationship between state and physical force is the very intimate one. In the past, various entities, starting with the clan, have known physical force as a normal means. Today, contrary to the past, though we are compelled to say that the state is the only human community which lays claim to the monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force. The modern state is the only legitimate actor to use violence. That's law. Remember, what is law? It means it's a command that is backed up with violence. Anytime you have a law, the breach of the law will authorize actors of the state to compel compliance with violence, force, arrest, prison. So if you want a law stopping people from having sugar, don't fool yourself that is not using violence, you're using violence. All more. A tax. Taxes are a form of extortion. Extortion by the state. The state has a gun. If you don't pay your tax, what happens to you? In a healthy state, the police will come and arrest you, seize your property, and put you in jail. The problem with Polish state is broken. It's a weak state. Weak states allow powerful people to do what they want without the fear of the law. That's a dangerous situation. That creates patriarchal rule. And that's not healthy. That's a broken state. In other words, no one should be above the law. Everyone should be terrified of the state. The state should be so terrifying that no criminal would dare risk it. Because if you ever challenge the state, the brutal power of the state will be utilized against you. And no mercy. We don't like that. We want we've gotten to the point where, no, please state, don't do that. Use social counseling. So what happens? The brutes win. The brutes and the criminals are going to do what they want. They're not afraid. And if now if you castrated the state to not to do what it should do, who benefits? The wicked, the bad, the corrupt. So that's the nature of the problem here. Dirty hands. Weber's clean about this. The problem is, you want clean hands. That's a child. You're not in the real world. You live in a fantasy. The real world is often not nice. It requires compromises. It requires, it requires sacrifice. It requires people to sometimes not do what they want. It also sometimes requires obedience. So therefore, that's the problem of the modern political world. The modern political world is we have this view of the world where everything is so wonderful and it's at our fingertip. We have luxury and things like this. Everything is so easy. We're so comfortable. Everyone is playing their little video game. Tocqueville talked about this. Tocqueville said in his Democracy in America, this is individualism, radical individualism, where we're all these isolated individuals, all enjoying our perfect life, but we're in this state, we're so isolated and so alone, we're easy pawns. And we are not strong enough to stand up to, when powerful forces wish to intimidate us, we're not strong enough to stand up and say no. We're so habituated to our luxury and custom, we'll not surrender it. We'll not give it up. Now that's why I'm going to, and I'll end today on reading the quote I gave you today from Burke on his reflection. This is that famous passage that everyone talks about. But the age of chivalry is gone, that of sophisters, economists, and calculators have succeeded, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever. Never, never more shall we behold that generous loyalty to rank and sex, that proud submission, that dignified obedience, that subordinated the heart, which kept alive, even in servitude itself, the spirit of an exalted freedom. The unbought grace of life, the cheap defense of nations, the nurse of manly sentiment and heroic enterprise is gone. It is gone, that sensibility of principle, that chastity of honor, which felt a stain like a wound, which inspired courage while it's mitigated ferocity, which ennobled whatever it touched, and under which vice itself lost half its evil by losing all its grossness. This mixed system of opinion and sentiment had its origins in the ancient chivalry, and the principle, though varied in its appearance by the varying states of human affairs, subsisted and influenced through a long succession of generations, even to the time we live in. If it should ever be totally extinguished, the loss, I fear, will be great. It is this which has given its character to modern Europe. It is this which has distinguished it under all its form of government and distinguished it to its advantage from the states of Asia and possibly those states which flourished in the most brilliant period of the antique world. It was this which, without confounding rank, had produced a noble equality and handled it down through all the gradations of social life. It was this opinion which mitigated kings into companions and raised private men to be fellows with kings. Without force or oppression, it subdued the fierceness of pride and power. It obliged sovereigns to submit to the softer collar of social esteem, compelled stern authority to submit to eloquence, and gave domination, vanquishers of law, to be subdued by manners. But now all of this is to be changed. All the pleasing illusions which had made power gentle and obedience liberal, which harmonized the different shades of life, and which by bland assimilation incorporated into politics the settlements which beautify and soften private society, are to be dissolved by this new conquering empire of light and reason. All the decent draperies of life are to be rudely torn off. All the superadded ideas furnished from the wardrobe of the moral imagination, which the heart owns and the understanding ratifies as necessary to cover the defects of our naked, shivering nature, and to raise it to dignity in our own estimations, are to be explored as a ridiculous, absurd, and antiquated fashion. On this scheme of things, a king is but a man, a queen but a woman is but an animal not of the highest order. All homage is paid to sex in the general as such, and without distinct views, is to be regarded as a romance and folly. Regicide and parricide and sacrilege are but fictions of superstition, corrupting jurisprudence by destroying its simplicity. The murder of a king or a queen or a bishop or a father are but only common homicide. And if the people are to be by chance, any chance, or in any way gainers by it, a sort of homicide which the most pardonable, and into which we ought not to make too severe a scrutiny. On the scheme of this barbarous philosophy, which is the offspring of cold hearts and muddy understandings, and which is as void of solid wisdom as it is destitute of all taste and elegance. Laws are only to be supported only by their own terrors, and by their concern which each individual may find in them from his own private speculation, or can spare to them from his own private interest. In the groves of the academy, at the end of every vista, you will see nothing but the gallows. Nothing is left which engages the affections on the part of the commonwealth. On the principle of this mechanic philosophy, our institutions can never be embodied. If I may use the expression in persons, so as to create in us love, veneration, admiration, or attachment. But that sort of reason which banishes the affections is incapable of filling their place. Those public affections combined with manners are required sometimes as supplements, sometimes as correctives, always as aids to laws. The precept given by a wise man, as well as a great critic, for the construction of poems is equally true as to states. Non status est publica ses poemata dulcia sonoro, which is, it is not enough to be it is not enough to have beautiful poems, let them be sweet as well. Okay, he says, as a translation from the Latin. He goes, there ought to be a system of manners to every nation, which a well-informed mind would be disposed to relish. To make us love our country ought to be lovely. Okay. I end today's class on that reflection because I think this is the difference between the ancient world. Burke is always a modern, writing of the French Revolution. He's pointing to the loss of something that was there, and how the modern world, the thing he describes is the modern world. The world of calculation, utility, individual interest. Okay, see you next week.